Hello and welcome to the Raptors Weekly Podcast for the week of November 19th. I'm your host, Wham Lou. I'm joined on the podcast to discuss sort of a, not depressing, but just disappointing 1-3 week with Joe Wolfon, my fellow Pound the Rock podcast co-hosts. Always got to plug Pound the Rock every time you come on.
Absolutely, man, especially given Dwayne Casey just paid a visit. It was, and then, it was an interesting one.
Like, you think Dwayne gave that rock one last pound and it finally broke?
I don't know. I'm really actually curious to know what happened to it because it was spotted in like the bowels of the ACC or Scotiabank Center. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I don't know. I don't know if anyone's seen it since then. Like it was on some sort of a gurney, like it was going to be wheeled out somewhere. So I'm curious to know whether it ended up in Detroit or it was just taken somewhere and destroyed.
Taken somewhere and destroyed. Masai was like, yo, put that shit in the Lake Ontario. Okay.
Yeah, Nick Nurse wanted it out of his sight.
I can only imagine if that rock was still there. After the game, Dwayne Casey, delirious in his excitement, just starts pounding the rock just furiously. And the whole team to pound the rock, like Bruce Brown on the Pistons to pound the rock. Like, yeah. Man.
Oh, my God.
Good win for Dwayne Casey. I guess that was the biggest game of the week. Well, that one or the Celtics game. Although I think there was way more drama in the Pistons game. Celtics game, you can understand them losing an OT, especially with Kyrie playing like that. But, I mean, the 1-3 weeks. So I think, when the Raptors entered the week 12-1, like there were so many positives that it was like hard to assess where this team truly stood. And I think that you just learn a lot more in losses. So, what do you think was one of the biggest weaknesses that the Raptors have in terms of just like what got exposed in this past week?
I think late game execution, and it's not. I don't know if that's like a structural flaw or if it's just kind of ironing out the kinks with a team that's maybe not entirely familiar with each other just yet. And Nick Nurse sort of still easing into the job a little bit, and I don't know if that's like a problem that's going to persist or if that was just something that cropped up at an inopportune time. But like some really poor late game execution, and like we didn't really see that in the games leading up to this week because the Raptors haven't really like played a lot of crunch time.
Yeah.
So that was obviously disappointing, and I think just like defensively, again, I think the personnel is such that the Raptors should be a top defensive team. We haven't really seen that from them yet. Like they've obviously put together great stretches of defense, but I think on the whole they've been a little bit disappointing at that end. And again, I don't know really if that's a question of their scheme or if it's just execution. Like definitely in that Pelicans game, as well as the Pelicans shot in that game, like I think the Raptors did a pretty poor job in general of like getting over top of screens and trailing, and they weren't, applying a lot of ball pressure. Like there was a lot of stuff where I'm like, I think it just came down to like effort and communication. Mm-hmm. And I've seen like a lot of miscommunication too, where it's like they don't really know whether they're switching or hedging or doubling, and like a lot of time they end up sending two to the ball and like end up scrambling after that. Like miscommunications like that have been happening a lot, I feel, and I just think. I expect that's the kind of thing that's just going to get sorted out over time. But it's, like the team's also kind of banged up right now, so it makes it tough. But yeah, I don't know. What about you? Did you see anything in particular that was like a point of concern, or is it just kind of like early season kinks?
I think something like execution is something that you feel like, or at least you would figure a good coach would be able to sort of sort that out throughout the season as the year goes on. Especially with the newer group, you would expect them to be able to come together and figure some of that stuff out. And I think especially like Kawhi's already like publicly admitted that like he knows about like 60% of the offense. So there are still more pieces to be added in. And I think the way the Raptors kind of use Kawhi towards the end of the Pistons game and towards the end of the Celtics game, I think people sort of got very angry at the fact that it was ISO ball, and it was obviously one of the criticisms against Dwayne Casey. But I think even going to, like, running isolation plays, I think with Kawhi is okay. I just think that they probably need to develop better ways to do it. And I think Like, for example, Kyle Lowry setting that like little like brush screen to get the switch. Like, I just don't see a need for that. At least like I don't know if like again if that's Kyle calling the plays or Nick Nurse calling the plays, but I just think execution obviously down the stretch has just not been entirely clean, and I would like to see the Raptors not necessarily go away from isolation and putting the ball in Kawhi's hands. I think that's the most effective way to play, but just find sort of better opportunities to put him in the in the post, for example. I think he would be the Raptors would do really well to just like clear out one side of the floor, put Kawhi in the post and then get the ball to him, period. You can even set a screen before that. Hopefully you can cause a little switch and maybe Kawhi gets a smaller guy on him, but like that's a better way to introduce a switch, or at least get Kawhi in a good position rather than like Kyle Lowry trying to screen for him like 30 feet from the hoop and you're basically just bringing two defenders to the ball, because like I don't think Kawhi's his handle isn't really that good to consistently evade two defenders, and I think that became an issue in the Pistons game and also the Celtics game. But I think the other worry I have a little bit is just 3-point shooting. Like I think the Raptors have been really disappointing in that regard, and their 3-point shooting was a big reason in their loss to the Pistons and definitely to the Celtics.
Yeah, but again, like I think that they have the personnel to be a good 3-point shooting team. So I wouldn't say that's something that actually worries me. That okay. Actually, to me, is almost something that's like encouraging, because I think you can reasonably expect there to be some positive regression there. And if they have normal 3-point shooting nights, like they win that Pistons game no problem, and they probably win the Celtics game as well. So I think that I don't think that's something that's going to persist. Like they have a lot of good 3-point shooters, and obviously some of them aren't shooting particularly well right now. Kyle's really cooled off after just a ridiculous start.
Yeah.
And Kawhi's also cooled off. He hasn't been shooting the 3-ball particularly well. Like pretty much everybody except Danny Green, I think, has been like shooting poorly from deep. Like Ibaka, as good as he's been, hasn't really been shooting particularly well from 3. So I think they'll be fine in that regard. Fred obviously as well. Like he had a good game against the Bulls, but like 0 of 6 against Boston. I think ultimately, like, I don't know if they're going to be, a top 10 3-point shooting team, but first of all, like the volume is still there, which is a good sign. Like they got up 45 threes in that Pelicans game. I think they only got up 18 against Detroit, but the Pistons are tops in the league at taking away 3-pointers. And we saw that with Dwayne Casey last year coaching the Raps. Like his defenses have generally been really, really good at limiting opponents' 3-pointers. So, yeah, I mean, I think the fact that they are getting a lot of 3-pointers off, and that they have enough like good 3-point shooters on the team, it just tells me that ultimately they're going to be fine in that regard.
Yeah, I hope so. But because it does seem strange that like so many of the shooters, are sort of underperforming on this lineup. And the weird thing is like, if you go to like Synergy Stats or whatever they're presented on NBA.com as, and you look at wide open threes, the Raptors are 7th in the NBA right now in wide open threes, which is no defender within 6 feet. The Raptors are shooting 18 of those per game. And they're actually shooting those well. It's just like the Raptors aren't really getting the good, like, not even good contested looks, because that's almost oxymoronic, but like I just feel like anytime the Raptors are catching and shooting, they're like a decent team, but anytime the Raptors pull up, it's been tough. And it's like Kawhi's pull-up 3 is like hasn't really been as consistent this year. Kyle Lowry, I thought like early in the year he was great, and then of late he's been ice cold. CJ Miles, it kind of pulled up a little bit last year. This year you can't hit anything. And then Fred, I think Fred has also struggled a little bit. And I just like, do you think there's a way to get those guys better looks, or is it just a case of if you're going to have the ball that much, then it's probably going to be difficult to get a good pull-up shot?
I think they've been getting pretty good looks. I mean, the CJ thing is tricky because I just think he really struggles to get a lot of separation at this point, I think.
Okay.
Like, he just doesn't look like particularly quick to me, and I feel like it's been really hard for him to get a lot of clean looks. Like they have that pet play where they'll have like one of the bigs basically come up and like fake a high screen and then veer into like a flare screen for him. And that play is always pretty effective. Like he's still obviously really good at just catching and shooting. He can get that shot off so quickly, but I just think like I don't know. He to me just like hasn't been getting a lot of clean looks because he physically is like not explosive enough to get enough separation. But the rest of the guys, I don't think like the process has been particularly bad. Like Lowry takes some shots that maybe look in a vacuum kind of ill-advised, but he's definitely proven capable of knocking them down. And Fred the same. Like he's taken some pretty audacious threes, but
yes, those 2-for-1 threes for Fred are really crazy, man. I don't think he has the range for that. Like I know it's like a 2-for-1, you want to get 2 shots, but like that first shot, if you're shooting it from like 35 feet, like Fred looks so small when he shoots it, like it doesn't look like he can actually hit the rim.
Right.
And often he doesn't, you know? Yeah.
Well, I mean, I guess it's to that point where you're like, if that's the shot you're getting in a 2-for-1 scenario, then maybe it's not even worth it. But yeah, like I think they've done a pretty good job, and like Siakam has been shooting threes really well, and they consistently get him open looks in the corner. I mean, nobody really guards him there, so that's part of it. But if he can continue to prove capable of knocking those down even semi-reliably, then that's just going to be super helpful. Like he already obviously has no trouble staying on the floor in any lineup configuration, but like if he can consistently knock down threes, then that's also a game changer, I think. And I don't know, man. I think I just think that'll come around eventually. I really do. It's just a cold spell, and like we see this happen sometimes, and I don't think it's a big deal. I think if anything, it's just like a positive indicator that they've been playing as well as they have, despite having substandard shooting. So
yeah, I agree. I agree on that part. I think honestly, over time, it'll even out. What do you think? What are you seeing from this team defensively in terms of? I think the Pelicans game, I think revealed a little bit of structural weaknesses in the Raptors defense, in that like they rely very heavily on their centers to defend, which has sort of traditionally been the case for the Raptors over the years. But yeah, I think like the Raptors kind of willingly concede a little bit of those non-restricted area paint twos, and I think teams that have been able to hit those on a consistent basis, and I think the Pelicans, I think they shot like 70% on floaters and stuff like that, like Etuan Moore, Drew Holiday, guys like that. That's one area where the Raptors, I think, are a little bit vulnerable.
Yeah, I think the Pelicans are also just a team that's uniquely qualified to exploit that. And I don't know if they should overreact to that one game, because Etuan Moore has like historically been one of the most accurate floater shooters in the league. Yeah. And maybe if they, when the next time they play the Pelicans, they can adjust, but I don't know if they want to change their whole scheme because of that one game. But yeah, I mean, that is like their defense is like they drop back and they have the guard kind of trail over top of the screen. And if those guards aren't like getting over or staying attached, then it really puts a lot of stress on the big, who's trying to guard 2 players at once. And it was like in that Pelicans game, typically the big would try and stay home on Anthony Davis, which I think is smart. Like you'd rather give up a floater than just give up an easy lob. But eventually, like Etuan Moore was hitting so many floaters that I think almost subconsciously they started like drifting towards him in those 1-on-2 scenarios, and then they would just get those lobs over the top. And there wasn't really anything that they could do about it. I think the guards just like weren't really doing a good enough job of staying connected, and that just makes it really difficult. And I think Fred has been like a particularly bad offender. Danny Green had like a couple rough games, but I thought he looked better for most of that Celtics game. But like Fred to me is like last year, I thought what made him really good defensively was how hard he fought to get through those screens. And I don't know, I haven't really seen that from him this year. And I don't know if it's just the injury that's bugging him or something else going on, but he hasn't looked entirely right. Yeah. No, I think like, look, the Pelicans are always going to be a really difficult matchup in that regard. Like for a team that plays the sort of scheme that the Raptors do, like you don't really want to concede a switch when it's Anthony Davis setting a screen. And so, yeah, I don't know entirely what you do in that case. Like there were a couple times I think where they tried to, instead of going over top of like that pin down screen, they tried to go underneath it, and then it was like each one were basically just like flared out to the 3-point line and got an open catch and shoot 3. Like
He
they
was so
had
good
a
in that
counter
game,
ready for that. It was absurd.
Um,
So yeah, I don't know. I don't know if that's really like a structural problem. Like I guess you could say there's a structural problem in that the Raptors centers aren't especially mobile, and they're not the best when it comes to like defending those plays 1-on-2. But not that many centers in the league are, really good at that. So there's like Rudy Gobert and there's Embiid and there's Horford, but
yeah.
there's not a lot of guys who can do it effectively.
Well, I was gonna say, I think defensively, I think Ibaka has been great, sort of just executing the scheme. I mean, I think it's really geared to work when Ibaka's at center. But I do think the Raptors have a lot of issues when JV plays center. And it's obviously not like a revolutionary thought to be like, well, the Raptors are not necessarily as strong defensively with JV at center. But I think it's just kind of the same issues that you see in previous years of like the Raptors guards are generally speaking not the greatest defensively. I think Kyle is a great help defender, but in terms of on-ball defense, he just hasn't really been there this year. I mean, just watch the highlights of that Kyrie 43-point performance.
Mm-hmm.
Like, Kyle tries to be in all the right places, and again, he tries so hard playing help defense that he is a really good defender. But like on ball, it's just not the same, and they kind of rely. I think Nurse has a strange thing about relying on Fred to pressure ball handlers, and I guess he is the quickest of the bunch, so it's not so bad. But at the same time, man, I would just very much like to see a little bit more usage of DeLon Wright defensively, because I think DeLon defensively, because he's longer, because he's more active, and because he's more switchable, like you can just play a lot differently with DeLon than you can with Fred or with Kyle. And I'm not quite sure why Fred is always the go-to defender off the bench. You know what I mean? But I think, yeah, just because the Raptors have some weaknesses at, with point guard defense, especially with quicker guards, like that's always going to put undue pressure on like the center. And I think Serge is really great at recovering. And I think, honestly, you can't say anything negative about Serge all year. He's been phenomenal on and off the court. I mean, he's also just turned into a hilarious personality. If you haven't listened to the Danny Green pod that he did, that was really fun.
Yeah, it's great.
Gave everyone nicknames, and he revealed that he calls Fred VanVleet "Bet on Your Life." Bet on, which is super dark, but bet on your life. And then Danny Green, I think, was Green Juice.
Yeah. I didn't really understand the Kawhi ones at all.
No, I didn't get that. Like, Babyface Assassin is not. It's not really babyface. He has like age appropriate face. I think. Like, he looks 27.
He called him Cape Town.
He called him
and Zombie Deli.
Oh yeah, that's right. Oh yeah, it was JV that calls him Babyface.
Yeah.
But I mean, yeah, I just think that like the Raptors kind of. I think one of the issues with the bench right now is like I think they really are struggling to accommodate with basically the way that Jakob Poeltl used to play defense with that second unit, and then now with the way JV plays defense on the second unit. And I think it's just causing a bit of disruptions. I think over time it should be improved because I think JV does a lot of things for the bench in terms of like rebounding and just being a solid presence at the basket that I think it does help. But I mean, at the same time, like I just think defensively it hasn't really quite been there for JV this year, and I think that's probably making Fred look a little bit worse because he can't be as aggressive on the ball screen if there's no one basically backing him up.
Yeah, I guess I can see that. I mean, I don't know. I just like the eye test to me, like Fred has not been good defensively, and I don't know if that has anything. I don't know if that has anything to do with JV being out there or not, but yeah, I mean, it's definitely true. Like Poeltl last year, I think it was like pretty easy to kind of funnel guys towards him because he was so effective at protecting the rim last year.
Yep.
And JV isn't quite that guy, but yeah, I don't know. To me, just like Fred like hasn't looked especially quick, like moving laterally, and he's obviously he's small. And I think like that became really obvious to me when I was watching him try and D-up Kyrie, who's not an especially large point guard.
No, like very regular size.
Yeah, he's like average size for a point guard, and man, he just looked huge compared to Fred. Like Fred was, for whatever reason, put into the game for a defensive possession at like the very end of the first half in that game, and Kyrie just like went right at him and scored over him so easily. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. He was able to make it work last year, I think, just by like fighting really hard. and just being ultra aggressive and engaged. And I don't know if it's for lack of trying, but it hasn't quite been there for him this year. And yeah, Valanciunas, I mean, look, there's the kind of physical limitations that he has that aren't really ever going to go away, I don't think. I think he's really like made the most of his physical attributes. And I think the Raptors have done a good job of kind of minimizing his weaknesses at the defensive end with their scheme. Mm-hmm. But ultimately, I just don't know if there's anything that you can really do to remedy that issue.
Yeah, that is true, which I think that's one of the things where it's not really quite negotiable for the Raptors. I think actually point guard defense is something that is going to be a tricky issue because I think offensively you would much rather prefer to have Fred or Kyle. I mean, Kyle obviously number one, and then Fred, and then DeLon. But I think point guard defense is kind of a bit of an issue, and I think, yeah, I mean, outside of Ibaka, who I'm not entirely sure I can trust Ibaka to play this well all year, especially after seeing what he did in the playoffs last year.
Yeah.
So I think those are the two areas where I'm keeping my eye on. You know what I mean? Like as the season goes on, I think the Raptors might need to sort of tweak the roster a little bit just to try to address those two issues. Because, like, let's be real, we have Kawhi for 1 year, and you want to make the most of this 1 year. This doesn't mean trade everyone for immediate pieces, but I think if trades come up, I think more pieces should be considered to be in play. Even though the Raptors' record is good, that's fine. But I think against top competition so far this year, the Raptors have been all right. They haven't necessarily been great on that end. One other area that I'm a little bit concerned about is secondary scoring, and I think the Raptors have had pretty good secondary scoring because Serge has scored a lot, and like Pascal has really come on strong. And Kyle was hot to start the year, and obviously Kawhi's the number one guy, but like there isn't really a reliable secondary scorer. And maybe you disagree with me because Kyle could be that guy, but I'm a little bit worried in terms of just like who else can create a shot. Like with the way Kyle has been up and down this year, I'm not fully sure if I can trust Kyle to beat that secondary scorer.
What about Siakam?
Okay, so could Siakam be a secondary scorer? I mean, the only issue I have with Siakam is that, like, because he doesn't shoot it particularly well, I think you can only really have one of Siakam or Kawhi sort of attacking in the same area because they kind of operate in the same space. Mm-hmm. And so it's sort of a your turn, my turn situation. And
right.
Yeah, that's it. But I mean, otherwise, I think Siakam's scoring has been pretty solid. I mean, like, I'll trust him to average like 15 if he stays in the starting lineup and plays the same role. He could. I don't see why he couldn't average like 15 points a game.
Right. Well, look, I'll say this. I think just by virtue of having, like, if you have Lowry and Ibaka or Lowry and Valanciunas on the floor at the same time, it's almost like a secondary scorer by committee. Because if you run a pick and roll with those two guys, it's like a really reliable source of offense, I think. You know, whether it's Kyle pulling up or whether it's him hitting one of those guys on the roll. And, I mean, look, Kyle hasn't been great lately, but he has, like, I think continuously just delivered like really good pocket passes to those guys and put them in really good positions to score. And like you were mentioning a couple weeks ago, just like how many of his assists were going to Serge.
Yeah,
like
it was nuts.
So
by far the most of the team.
Yeah,
like twice more than anyone else.
So much of what Serge has done this year is like a product of Lowry kind of spoon feeding him, I think. Mm-hmm. And that's not to take away from what he's done, but like last year, so often he was on the floor with JV, and like if he was setting a pick, like he would pop, and like you didn't really see him rolling to the basket all that often. And I think it's just been really effective having him roll, either catch the ball like in the mid range, and he's been so money on like that pick and pop in the mid range, or like getting kind of into floater range. That push shot's been really effective, or just basically rolling all the way to the rim and like getting layups and dunks. So to me, like that's just like a really effective play, a high pick and roll with Lowry and one of Serge and JV. Both those guys have been great on the roll. So maybe like none of those guys individually is a reliable secondary scorer, but together, I think that's a good kind of two-man game to have in your pocket if you need to get a bucket. And I frankly wish the Raptors went to it more down the stretch instead of, I don't have a fundamental problem with the Kawhi isolation, but in moderation. I don't want that to be the entire offense in the fourth quarter. So
For sure. Yeah, and then I guess the last concern really that you would really pick at with the Raptors right now, which again, it's a good start for sure, and they're getting the wins. It's pretty good.
Yeah.
I think the other thing you could pick at maybe is just the bench, right? The bench hasn't really been nearly as strong as last year. Like, what are you seeing that's wrong with the bench? Because I think for a while I was like, well, DeLon and Fred haven't really been in the lineup. But even now that they're in the lineup, they look kind of, I don't know, they're just not really running the team the way it was run last year, where the Raptors had, the second unit had such a great mix of just like creating enough offense using their defense, getting stops, running, getting easy buckets. And then also just like the second unit had a structure and flow in which like no one was really that talented, but they were able to run plays at a speed and at a fluidity that I think was able to, flummox defenses, even in half-court scenarios, despite the fact that like CJ Miles was their best scorer. So like what's wrong with the bench right now?
I think they're definitely suffering from a lack of Pascal. I don't know if we, gave him enough credit for what he did to make that unit work last year. Mm-hmm. And I think without him, you don't really have, like, DeLon I think is pretty good in the open floor.
Yeah.
And Fred's okay. But other than that, like, it's like you were saying, they would get a lot of offense last year just by kind of creating turnovers and then running out in transition. And without Siakam, I don't know, they're just not nearly as good at doing it, especially if it's Valanciunas playing with the bench. So they've lost that element. And I think, the fact that Fred has struggled has really had a trickle-down effect, because a lot of time it's like he's the primary playmaker with that unit. Mm-hmm. But I just feel like there's so many times that he'll have these drives, and whether it's like going one-on-one or getting a high screen, where he'll like, I don't know if it's a lack of aggressiveness or what, but like the drives kind of go nowhere, man. Like he'll circle back out and just kind of reset.
Yep.
And like eat 12 seconds of clock just dribbling around. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I don't really know what that's about. But that's been a big reason I think that they've struggled. For me, I don't know. I just think like they don't quite have the personnel group that they had last year. And obviously CJ being out and struggling when he was healthy hasn't helped. And now OG is out. Like they haven't had a lot of like constancy with those groups. Like there's been so much shuffling around and so much turnover, whether because of, JV and Serge flip-flopping in the starting lineup or injuries or whatever it happens to be. So to me, I think I'm not advocating for Siakam to go to the bench, but I do think like they got to start staggering these guys a little bit more. You know what I mean? Like Siakam can start and maybe he comes out after like 6 minutes.
Yeah. It's an easy sub too, because you just bring in OG.
Right.
And I think the starting unit works like really well with OG instead of Pascal. Even though they're different players right now, but I think there's depth in terms of how much more you can use Kawhi and how much more you can use Kyle in the middle pick and roll, that like, you can kind of spare Pascal from the starting lineup a little bit. Even though I would never take him out of the starting lineup right now. I think he's played so well, he deserves to be there. But yeah, I mean, 6 minutes in, take him out for OG. Makes a lot of sense to me. Yeah,
and then you can bring him back with that bench group, and I think it'll start to look a lot more similar to what it looked like last year, honestly.
Okay.
But I think that would still be contingent on like CJ coming back and like getting back to being the guy he was last year, because they need his shooting in that group. So
yeah.
Okay.
Well, I think we've amply diagnosed the Raptors' problems so far. Again, these are some first world ass problems. The Raptors are
seriously
playing really well right now. And let's look ahead briefly to the upcoming schedule. The Raptors, it just feels like, maybe it's just like I'm getting older, but like it feels like the Raptors play every single day. Another 4-game slate for the Raptors. Well, by the way, the Raptors have played 17 games already. The Pistons have only played 13. How? How is there already a 4-game difference in a month? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But the Raptors, the schedule does not slow down. The Raptors continue their road trip. They're already in Orlando right now. It's actually a nice place to have an off day, really, although I think they're running practice tomorrow. But Tuesday, the Raptors play the Orlando Magic. The Magic have been quietly sneaking up on people. And even though the talent isn't that great, but they're 8-8, and they have some pretty decent wins. They beat the Sixers, they beat the Lakers. I don't know if you would really call those Spurs that great, but I mean they beat the Spurs. Like they beat the Celtics earlier this year. Like they've had some surprise wins. So if the Raptors aren't careful, you can't really overlook the Magic game. Even though I feel like in years past the Raptors would always beat the Magic.
Yeah, they've been playing really well. Vucevic has been ridiculous.
Yep.
And Terrence Ross has been shooting the ball really, really well. Aaron Gordon's been playing well. Like even DJ Augustine. I mean, I still think it's pretty suboptimal to have him as your starting point guard, but he's been shooting the ball well. They've got a nice kind of mix, I think. I don't have a ton of faith that they're going to be able to keep this up. Like they started last year 8-4 too.
That's true.
And obviously we saw how that finished up, but yeah, I don't know. They've got a lot of interesting players and probably more talent than people gave them credit for at the start of the year. And the Raptors can't really afford to take them lightly. Like I kind of expected them to be a middle of the pack defensive team. Like I feel like they were good enough on that side of the ball to cobble together like at least a league average defense. But the fact that they've been scoring as well as they have has been the real surprise to me.
Yeah. For sure.
And yeah, they have the kind of players that I think can give the Raptors problems. Like a big athletic wing like Gordon, who's quick. Like if you stick a big on him, like that's obviously going to be a bit of a mismatch. And if you stick a small on him, I think, I don't know. He's not that good at posting up, I guess. But
yeah.
But yeah, I think Vooch has been the guy who's like really carried them offensively, so that'll be an interesting test for the Raptors bigs.
Yeah, Serge is gonna have to have a big game against his former club. It's always weird to think about Serge Ibaka in a Magic uniform.
Yeah.
It's super weird. Like I can like really picture him in a Raptors uniform now. Like I'm really getting used to it, and obviously OKC. But man, those like 4 months he spent with the Magic, that was strange.
Man, that trade, like holy shit! They traded
that was
Oladipo
such a
Sabonis.
bad trade.
Man.
Yeah.
But yeah, like I wonder if they will start JV that game actually to try and deal with Vooch.
You think so?
I mean, I don't know. It's tough because he can stretch you out a bit.
Yeah. To be honest, I think they honestly are very, very quietly just thinking, man, we should just start Serge full time.
Yeah.
I really wouldn't mind either player, but we'll see. If we do go with JV to start this game, I want to see JV get the ball and just attack Vucevic one-on-one and see if you can put him in foul trouble. I think that's probably the best way to do it. But I also don't mind JV off the bench against a guy like Mo Bamba, for example, because like against those like long lean shot blockers who are better help defenders than they are like one-on-one defenders, I think JV really succeeds against those guys.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, but I mean, look, I honestly think the Raptors match up really well with the Magic. Like, I think you stick Pascal and Aaron Gordon, you're comfortable with that. DJ Augustine has been a guy who has burned the Raptors in the past. Also, it's weird, he's a former Raptor. I thought he was on his way out of the league actually when he was with the Raptors, but he's still kicking around right now and quietly decent. But I think Kyle should be able to hold DJ Augustine to a reasonable number, and then I don't know, when you look at the rest of the roster, like, I mean, when you're throwing Kawhi Leonard against Jonathan Isaac or Kawhi Leonard against Evan Fournier or, Danny Green against Wesley Iwundu, like, yeah, I mean, the Raptors going to win this game.
Be okay. Yeah.
Okay, so we got that win. Raptors then the next night play the Atlanta Hawks in Atlanta to complete 4-game road trip. The Hawks are not very good. They play very fast. They play very sloppy, but they're just not very good. And I don't know. They've lost 7 in a row. They probably will lose on Monday against the Clippers. So, I don't see this as anything other than a win.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, it is the second night of a back-to-back, and there will probably be some Raptors resting in that game, but I don't think that'll particularly matter.
Wow. We won't have Kawhi versus Vince Carter. What a shame. Okay, and then Friday, the Raptors return home. They play the Washington Wizards. The Wizards have kind of turned their season around a little bit, except for the fact that they're still 5-11, and Dwight Howard just pulled his glute And so, I don't know. They're still 29th in defense, by the way. Their offense has gotten a little bit better. I think Dwight has helped sort of establish more space in their pick and roll game, but ultimately their defense has still been trash. And if Dwight doesn't play, I mean, like we saw this team earlier in the year, and that was without Kawhi. Like with Kawhi, man, that's a win.
I don't think they've really turned their season around either. Like the 3 wins that they had to kind of like quote unquote get things back on track was they beat Miami, who've not been good.
No.
They beat Orlando, which I guess that somehow qualifies as a quality win, and they beat the Cavs. And then they lost to Brooklyn, and they just got dummied by the Blazers tonight. So, I'm not particularly worried about that game. Yeah, they're a mess, man.
No, they're terrible. And whenever you lose to the Nets, who didn't even have Karis LeVert, that's tough, man. That's tough. DeMarre Carroll had a cool 11-6 against. Remember when DeMarre Carroll was on the Raptors, and then we got Kawhi?
Yeah, we've come a long way.
Yeah, we have. Yeah, I mean that should be a win. Although a caution on that one. I mean, I think the Raptors and Wizards always play games pretty tightly, so I don't think it's gonna be a blowout, even with Kawhi. But ultimately, I think that's a win. And then the Raptors wrap up the week. Miami is in town. Miami's a team I have no idea if they're good or bad. I think they're bad, but I think they have some moments of being good. They just lost again tonight to LeBron, and now they're 6-10 on the season. But I don't know. I mean, I just feel like they're just a tough, gritty defensive team. Like that's always how I remember them as. But when I've seen them this season, they haven't really been that gritty defensively. They've just been kind of stagnant offensively, and they rely a little bit too much on Whiteside, who is having a decent year, but like it's still Hassan Whiteside.
Yeah. I don't know, man. They just to me have a bunch of players who are okay, or pretty good, and nobody who really rises above that. So I think, those games can be kind of tricky. Mm-hmm. You take your foot off the gas a little bit. They play hard. They're very physical. They're well coached.
They're deep.
And so they can just kind of beat you, on the strength of numbers, I guess. And like, if they all are just kind of like pulling together and defending on a string, like they can definitely take you out of your rhythm. And there were a couple of, like the Raptors games against Miami last year were not fun.
No,
like,
they were, man. Dwayne Ellington, man.
So, like that, they could win that game. But I just think like the Raptors are so much more talented, and if they play anywhere close to up to their potential, then I think they should win. But it's never like a particularly fun game because they're going to rough you up a bit and muddy the game up a little bit and make you uncomfortable. So Raptors are going to have to be focused. I think that'll be a good test for them. Like, even defensively, just to like communicate, because they like Miami's a team that runs a ton of actions. They screen a lot.
Mm-hmm. They got shooters
and try and confuse you. So Josh Richardson's been playing really well.
Yep. Although Rodney he threw a shoe into the stands and got ejected today. It's very strange.
Weird move.
Yeah. I mean, the Heat are also a little bit banged up. Like James Johnson finally came back. Magruder's been in and out. Dwayne Wade's been in and out. Or I guess he's been away with, paternity leave. Dragic has sort of been in and out as well. Like, we'll see what team actually shows up. I think a full-strength Heat team gives the Raptors a little bit of problems defensively just because they always have. But, I mean, realistically, they should win. I guess it just feels kind of weird predicting a 4-0 week after the Raptors went 1-3. I think probably I predicted a 4-0 week for this one anyway. But, yeah, I mean, realistically, the Raptors should win most nights, and this week is not a particularly difficult. It's not a particularly difficult slate of games.
Yeah, I kind of think that they'll win them all.
Okay, well, there you go. Then we'll look silly, for talking so much about the Raptors' problems. But I think again, losses are more useful than wins in terms of just if you want to know where the weaknesses are on the Raptors.
Yeah, and it's also like, look, they've lost 4 games this year, and 2 of them have come down to like the Raptors having the ball basically with the dead shot clock and the game tied.
Should have not have lost that Celtics game, man. That game was a little bit stolen. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah, well,
the officiating down the stretch of that one was so garbage. Also, maybe stop Kyrie Irving one time, just once.
Do you think like they should have just blitzed him and like made him give up the ball? Nobody else in the Celtics was really playing particularly well. So he won that game on his own.
He did.
It was crazy.
Fully. And he was so good defensively. I could not believe how hard he was scrapping defensively.
That's been a season-long trend, honestly. Like he's been legitimately good at the defensive end. So he's definitely capable of doing it. But he kind of like started out last year defending really well also, and that tailed off by the end of the year. So we'll see.
That's true. Okay. All right. We're going to take a quick break back here. And then when we come back, we will empty out the mailbag.
I'm Brian Goldfinger from Goldfinger Injury Lawyers. We'd like to wish you and your family a happy holiday season. Don't drink and drive, don't token drive, and wait till you get to your destination to reply to that text. Visit goldfingerlaw.com.
Welcome back to the second half of the Raptors Weekly Podcast. Still here with Wolfon. Another reminder to listen to Pound the Rock. It's just this podcast that we're doing right here, except it's a little bit more professional, and there's cash, and we talk about the NBA. So listen to that. It's on iTunes and SoundCloud. I mean, wherever you need to find a podcast, you'll find it. So listen to Pound the Rock. We are going to answer some listener questions. As always, you can hit up at Raptors Republic. First one comes from Andre. How would you explain the Raptors' recent struggles from the three-point range in the Raptors' losses, and how the Raptors, can adjust? I think we touched on this a little bit in the first half of the podcast, but I don't know. First off, do you think Kyle Lowry's handling the ball a little bit too much? Because I think last year he got great success coming around screens, and you could have situations where DeMar could be the point guard and set up Kyle. Whereas this year, Kawhi's not really a point guard or even a point forward. He's just a finisher. And so maybe the Raptors need to find another way to get Kyle off the ball and have him shoot a little bit more. What do you think about that?
I think that he's a great off-ball player. And I don't know, maybe it's just a question of him playing a little bit more with DeLon. In those playing more of those 2-point guard lineups or 3-point guard lineups even. Because Kawhi obviously is a much better player than DeRozan is, but he's not as good a playmaker. And I think he also gets tunnel vision some of the time. Mm-hmm. He's not really looking to pass the ball when he gets it. So I don't know. It's hard to say just because at the start of the year, Kyle looked so good shooting off the dribble. And I don't know, the drop off, I don't know really what to chalk it up to. I still think those are good shots for him. But getting him coming off screen is always a good idea. I'm trying to I'm trying to see what he's shooting off the catch compared to off the dribble. But I don't know. Maybe it's just a question of him playing next to DeLon more. What do you think?
Yeah, I think they try to do a little bit of stuff with Danny Green holding the ball and initiating, but no one takes Danny Green seriously when he dribbles.
Yeah, nor should they.
And they try to put him into the post and stuff. They've got a couple of threes that way. I think they're moving a little bit away from their set offense in the last couple of weeks. I don't know if it's just a lack of practice or whatever, but the offense in general has looked a little bit less structured, which I think Nick Nurse kind of likes it that way. But in order to get guys clean shots off the ball, generally speaking, you would want to have a little bit more structure, especially if that guy you want to get shots for is your point guard.
Right.
Because it's not as simple as running pick and roll and then swing it to the weak side. It's you got to do a little bit more work to get Kyle some threes, and I think that's something the Raptors can really work on. I mean, to also just hit some open threes. I've seen the Raptors miss a lot of wide open threes this week. Next one from @RetroYeezy. At this point, is it better for Anunoby to start and for Siakam to come off the bench due to a lack of solid bench production?
No, I mean, we talked about this. I think that Siakam's got to keep starting. He's just been too good.
He's too good.
But I do think they should stagger him more and definitely give him more time with the bench. Yeah, that's what I would say.
Yeah. By the way, not that I would ever advocate trading away Pascal, but with how much hype Pascal is garnering and how much his performances have just looked so encouraging right now, if Pascal is a wonderful trade chip, if the Raptors choose to go that route, again, don't go that route. Please never trade Pascal. But Yeah, you got Pascal, and then you got JB, who has a pretty big salary. Like, if there were a star available, and I'm not talking like a Jimmy Butler rental, like if there
Anthony
were an actual
Davis.
star available, oof, this will be the time to go for it. But don't trade Pascal, man. Do not trade Pascal. What am I saying? Just putting that out there. Anyway, next one from Edwin. Was Coach Bud our first pick? And if you had to choose, who would be better?
I think he was their first pick. I mean, I don't have any intel to this regard, but all the reporting at the time was that was the guy that they wanted.
Apparently, they took Bud to go have lunch at like 11, which is not a great restaurant. I mean, there's a lot of great restaurants.
I'm sure it's still better than any restaurant in Milwaukee, but.
Yeah, the restaurants wouldn't even serve Giannis. Can you imagine Giannis going to a restaurant and they're like, "Sorry, man, you gotta wait. Like, it's an hour's wait list."
Yeah,
that's wild.
So yeah, I do think he was their first pick, and I think it's too early to make any kind of judgment to that effect. But okay. I mean, if we're going off of the first 15 or whatever games of the season, then yeah, I think he's done a better job than Nick Nurse has, but it's a long season, and Nick is new at the job, so I think we have a lot to learn about him as a coach still, and I just think it's way too early to say. But it'd be nice to have Bud, honestly. Like, the system that he's running in Milwaukee has been really, really effective.
Yeah, and I feel like it would work really well in Toronto as well. Next one from Ajanth. Should the Raptors make a play for Korver, even if it's just to prevent another East rival to pick him up as a buyout? Everyone is really afraid of teams picking up Korver, but the only thing I will say is I know it's the idea of adding more shooting to the Sixers is scary, but the more I look at the Sixers, I'm just like, there's a structural issue. They need their best players to shoot better, not necessarily more shooters. Because, like, you think about it, JJ Redick's already taking up a spot. Whoever they play at power forward, you can't play Korver at power forward, so that there's an issue there. And then if you have more shooting, then it's like, okay, you have a slight upgrade on Landry Shamet, but Shamet is sort of functionally doing what Korver is going to do, and so I don't know that necessarily changes too much for what the Sixers have, especially now that they have Butler and their offense is going to be geared more towards pick and roll stuff. But I don't know. I mean, Korver would be a nice addition for the Raptors for sure. Like, you would always want a shooter like that, but I think it'll be difficult to. You basically have to decide that CJ is not doing anything this year and basically punt on CJ and maybe even swallow an asset to do that, which it's just hard to do. I think the organization really likes CJ, and I think they're going to give him an opportunity to recoup his value instead of just bailing to get Korver. What do you think about Korver?
I think he'd be a nice piece to add. I just don't know how they do it. Like, you're saying they trade CJ, but obviously, like, the Cavs aren't going to do a 1-for-1 swap. Like, they're going to want an asset. I don't know, maybe a second rounder gets it done, in which case I'd be happy to do that. But I think, and what you're saying is important too. Like, I think they view CJ as like an important cultural piece. Like, he's a really good locker room guy. And I do think he was going to get it together when he gets healthy. I would rather have Korver if we're talking, strictly in basketball terms. Mm-hmm. But I just don't know if I don't know if CJ in a second rounder is getting it done. But I kind of agree with what you're saying. Like, him going to Philly. I mean, to me, like, one of the structural problems with that team right now is that the guys on their team that can shoot can't really play defense.
Yeah.
And they need to put like multiple shooters on the floor with, around Simmons and Embiid, and, whether it's Butler or whether it's Fultz, like, they really have to spread the floor around those guys, and they ultimately end up having to do it with guys who can get exploited at the defensive end. And I think Korver would just be another one of those guys.
Yeah. Like, I'd be much more afraid if they got Ilya Silva again somehow, which obviously they won't this year because Ilya Silva is pretty important to the Bucks, but
yeah, they're super thin in the front court. So that's the kind of guy that they need. Just like a better version of Mike Muscala, basically.
Yeah. Or honestly, like, if they got like a PJ Tucker type.
Yeah.
Man. It'd be terrifying. Hopefully they don't. Okay, next one from Canoe Girl. When does Kyle get a rest day? Apparently never. Which, by the way, I think the Raptors, I think they were pretty weary about playing Kyle extended minutes. And it was very interesting because Nurse was asked about Kyle and sort of his little jammed ankle or whatever happened to him. But again, he shouldn't have been in the game. It was like 85-55 with 2 minutes left in the third quarter. Like, what are you doing? And then he was asked about it, and Nick Nurse was like, well, we wanted Kyle to come out, but then Kyle was kind of want to get, stay in the game and get into a rhythm. In which case, I'm just like, why? You have to just pull him at that point, man. He can get his rhythm tomorrow. Like, we're playing like the Magic and the Hawks. There's a lot of chances to get his rhythm. Like, let's make sure he's healthy. Like, god damn, he's played a lot of minutes this year, and he's taken some huge hits.
Yeah, I don't know. That just like worries me a bit if the coach is saying that. Like, it makes me feel like he doesn't entirely have control of the situation.
That's what I'm saying.
Not like necessarily what you want to hear.
Kyle has a lot of control of the team. I'll say I feel like that's pretty clear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, in a way, I think that he should. Like, the team,
for sure.
If there's anything that I've taken away from this stretch, it's like the team really goes as Kyle goes. Even though Kawhi is here now, it's like we've seen Kawhi have, like, by his standards, some down games where the Raptors still look fine if Kyle is going. And when he's not going, like, the team kind of grinds to a halt.
Well, it's good to know that nothing has changed in the last 6 years.
Yeah. Well, anyway, I think that he'll probably rest for one of those games, like on the Magic Hawks back-to-back. Right?
I really hope so, man. Although there are incentive-based clauses in Kyle's contract that, might entice him to play more games. Who knows?
Well, I mean, hopefully he sees a big picture and knows that he's like not going to meet those incentives if he's getting ridden into the ground.
I hope so too. I really hope so too.
So yeah.
Yeah. He does not look like he's moving well, man. The amount of elevation he's getting in his jump shot is very different from what it was at the start of the season.
Yeah, and look, he was getting to the rim at will at the start of the year, which was like, now he's back to looking like he was last year, where he couldn't get to the rim at all, and was like struggling to finish when he gets there.
Yeah. Next one from RG. If you were able to trade one of our 14th/15th guys for any former Raptors since 2013, who would address the biggest need for this squad? Okay, so
PJ Tucker.
Ooh, yeah, PJ would be really good. Definitely in the top couple. I feel like present day James Johnson could be really useful too, because he could basically do the Pascal role off the bench.
True.
Like, big forward, can handle a little bit, and Dwayne Casey's not here for him to just get stapled to the bench anymore. But yeah, I don't know. What about Lou Williams? I feel like Lou Williams could actually do some damage at the second unit. It would just have to fundamentally change how the second unit would play. Like, if you brought in Lou Williams, you probably have to like bring in a real defensively sound center to make sure that like basically a Biyombo type to cover for Lou Williams defensively, because you can't really have.
Well,
JV
in that
Lou
case,
Williams.
is Lou, Fred, and DeLon all playing together at the same time?
Nah, I mean, I'm assuming you would. Yeah, I guess you could play DeLon full time at 3. We'll just see if his body holds up, which it won't.
Yeah. Man, the Magic are first in the Southeast Division. That is mental.
The Southeast is terrible, man.
What a disgrace.
Yeah.
I just think, man, PJ Tucker is so goddamn good. And his defensive versatility would be really nice. And also, he's shooting like 42% from 3. So
yeah,
that
his
would be
shooting
nice
has
as
gotten
well.
so much better over the years. I think, bro, if we had, I don't even know. Would PJ even start for the Raptors? I guess you would play him over Danny Green, but I don't know. I kind of would rather have Danny Green.
Yeah, maybe. I just think like PJ, you could play him in like so many different spots.
Sure.
Like you could play the 3, you could play the 4, you could play the 5. You could have him guard pretty much anybody on the floor. And I just think like imagine, like if you had him in that Celtics game, it's like you could run out a lineup where you just have, in theory, like Kawhi, Danny Green, PJ, Siakam, and I don't know, and Lowry out there, and just like switch everything. And you could start PJ on Kyrie, and just like be ready to switch whoever onto him, whether it's Siakam or Kawhi, or pretty much anybody else. Like, he's so versatile defensively. Like, he's the whole Rockets defense. It's wild.
It is really wild.
Terrence
There's a
Ross
couple
would be
questions
nice too.
here along the same theme of, Was a 3-game losing streak indicative of a bigger problem? We spent the first half of the podcast talking about that. Let's take 2 more questions. Okay, so from DeVince, is it time to have the discussion that Nick Nurse is not as good of an offensive coach as advertised? Do we need to start a dialogue about Nick Nurse 5 games into his coaching career?
I don't think we're at that point yet. And look, the Raps are still 3rd in the league in offensive efficiency. They're fine. And I'm not saying that the late game stuff isn't a concern, but I also think it's the kind of thing that they're going to figure out in time. But if it's halfway through the season and we're still seeing the same stuff where on those late game possessions it's just clear out for Kawhi over and over and over again, then I don't know, I might be singing a different tune. I just don't think we're at that point yet.
Yeah, same. Let's honestly, let's give him a little bit more time. I think the ISO thing is just really weighing heavily on people's minds. People hate seeing ISOs miss at the end of games. But also, man, you have to look at it from a strategic standpoint. And I said this when Dwayne Casey was here too, and I defended it then, and I'm going to defend it now. If it's a tie game, you probably want to make sure you do an ISO because, A, you can now make sure you use all the clock and take a shot with no time remaining, which is very important defensively because you don't want to leave any chance for there's time left and then the other team can go the other way and score. And then meanwhile, whatever percentage, basically you, if a Kawhi shot goes in 40% of the time, you have a 40% chance at winning, and then you have a 60% chance of going to overtime and a 0% chance of losing in regulation. It's pretty important to run an ISO in that situation. I think most teams do it. Imagine you run an elaborate play and then you have a turnover and they win the other way. That's way worse than bricking an ISO and going to overtime.
I would push back on that a little bit, and everything you said makes perfect sense. I get it. Just on a personal level, I would rather them play to win than to play not to lose. And I think I'd rather see them actually run a play where they're going to get a good shot. And if it doesn't work, trust their defense to get a stop. You know what I mean? I just it's obviously it's very low risk, but something about that also kind of rubs me the wrong way. It's almost too risk averse for my liking.
Okay.
It's go play to win,
Yeah.
That's my feeling.
Okay. Also, the one thing I would say about Nick Nurse and his end of game play calling is that all year he's done such a great job of calling plays after timeouts that it's just strange that none of that shows up in crunch time. You know what I mean? For the first 3 quarters, man, the Raptors give up a 6-0 run, no problem. We run a play, we clear out the side, JV gets a post up, he scores, or Kyle Lowry comes around some screens, he gets an open 3, or Kawhi gets put into a mismatch, and then he scores. Such clean, crisp execution, and then just down the stretch, none of it shows up. And I really do think that there is a little bit of power tug between Kyle and Nick Nurse in terms of just who is specifically calling those plays. So I think
did you see Kyle's body language coming out of the timeout before that last play of regulation against the Celtics was not great. I mean, he had his head down, basically skulked to the corner and put his hand that was what he was supposed to do, I guess. I can understand him being frustrated that he wasn't going to be in any way involved in that final play. But yeah, and it's you were saying, I know you didn't think that there was any purpose in having Lowry set a screen for Kawhi, but I actually thought they had some success they got Marcus Smart switched onto him a few times in that game, and I'm pretty sure Kawhi scored every single time.
Yeah, for sure. I think generally that's not a bad idea, but I just think that there's a cost to it a little bit. You know what I mean? It's not the cleanest way because even if you got the switch, you're still way above the 3-point arc. Kawhi still has to make a move. You basically you don't have that big of an opportunity to run that play. Whereas I really do prefer you just put him in the post and then you clear the floor so that all the defenders on the other side and then the guy guarding Kawhi can't really front, and so you have an easier time setting him up. I just think that that makes more sense than trying to screen so far above the 3-point arc. But
It's not objectionable on its face. I'll say that.
That's true. And then last one. I mean, there's a question about like Pascal getting the All-Star game. I don't really think that that's going to happen. I think there are some pretty good players that are going to get big stats ahead of him. So what about this one then from Calcino? Calcino? I don't know. Do you think the Raptors should just trade JV for a more mobile center that can defend and switch? Also, where do the Raptors need to make improvements at the team? Okay, so we've talked about the second half of the question. We kind of talked about the first half of the question too, but I don't know. If you trade JV for a mobile center, like A, is that a good idea? And then B, like who would you have in mind for something like that?
Yeah.
I'm not going to get my Tristan Thompson thing again. I don't really want Tristan Thompson like that, okay? I'm just saying that type of player.
I'm like really racking my brain trying to think of who that player would be. I mean, most likely you're going to have to match salary. So
also most likely JV doesn't have much trade value. Even though he's having like a good year, like his numbers are high, whatever, but like you just look at this like basically old school centers, they just never like Nick Vucevic is a better player on a much better contract and he gets nothing on the trade market. Brook Lopez, who I think honestly you could argue Brook Lopez is a little bit better or at least equivalent to JV. Very different players at this point. But the man got paid like $3 million. Okay, so it's tough to find a matchup.
Yeah, I mean, like all things being equal, like let's say salary wasn't an object and you could just flip JV for like Nerlens Noel, who I guess fits the bill of like a more mobile center who can switch a bit. But like,
I'm good.
I don't know. Is that making your team better?
No, I'm good, man. I don't
the thing is, I think most
shitting all over an Airbnb in Toronto.
What?
Yo, you remember that? Nerlens Noel, remember when he was in Philadelphia or whatever, he got like sued because he like rented out that Airbnb property and like literally left human feces all over the place.
He was living in an Airbnb when he played in Philadelphia?
I don't know. Something like that. Maybe he rented one Airbnb.
Oh, man. Anyway, I just think so like for the most part those guys like are giving you less value than JV at the offensive end. And the guys who are like going to be able to give you something at the offensive end and are like mobile enough to switch and like quarterback at defense, like I don't think those guys are going to be readily available in a trade for JV. So it just doesn't really seem like an option to me. It's like, I don't know, maybe like Robin Lopez.
I mean, 1-for-1, I think the Bulls might actually do that, but I don't think Robin Lopez really fits the team that much better than JV does. Although I think I don't know. Actually, I wouldn't hate that move. It's also weird organizationally to dump JV for that, because I think JV has like a lot of fans and rightfully so, and he's had a lot of great moments and like, you know.
All right, here's one to consider. So I think Derek Favors isn't trade eligible until December, like mid-December, because he's signed in the offseason, right?
Yeah.
But their salaries match up pretty nicely. So let's just assume that for whatever reason, like the Jazz decide they can't play Gobert and Favors together, so all they want is like a really good backup center.
So all they want is a guy who they know specifically definitely cannot play with. Yeah. I mean, they could use JV scoring. Let's be real.
Yeah. So let's say, they give up on the Favors Gobert experiment. Would you want to do that?
Yeah, I'd do that.
Yeah.
I like Favors. Yeah. And he makes the same money as JV does, except that there's no player option. He's just guaranteed that money. Well, by the way, so I've looked up in the Nerlens Noel thing, all right? According to TMZ, the 21-year-old Philadelphia 76ers star rented a 4,800 square foot home outside of Philly back in 2014, and he paid $54,000 for a 1-year lease. That's not great money management. So some of the highlights of what happened, all right? Splashed neon-colored sports drinks such as Gatorade on the carpets and throughout the home. That's not that bad. $30,000 in other damages to carpets. Extreme water damage throughout the home. Clogged toilets filled with cotton balls and feces. In addition, broken elevator. All right, $4,000 in damages to the stove. I don't even know how that's possible. Did you blow up the stove? Like, first off, the stove was worth $4,000. I don't know. It seems a bit trumped up. damage to the fridge, damage to the blinds, damage to the dishwasher, torn window screens. And here's the scary part. The owners say they demanded $42,000 to repair the damage, but the day after they sent the demand, a tombstone with the words, "Rest in peace," mysteriously appeared on the front steps of the property. The owners believe it was Noel's doing and are considering it a death threat. Okay, so I don't really think it was a death threat, but like, yeah. That does seem excessive, bro. I don't know why you first off paid $54,000 for an Airbnb in Philly. It's just something wrong with you if you do that.
Yeah. Well, at least he accepted that 4-year, $70 million deal from the Mavs.
Yep.
Oh, wait.
Yeah, he got some bad advice. You got some bad advice on that one.
Oof. Anyway, so yeah. We won't trade for Nerlens, but...
Yeah. But only because he shits everywhere.
Yeah. Otherwise, sign me up.
Okay. All right. Well, fine. I think that does it for the podcast. I think we have thoroughly talked about the Raptors' problems. Yeah, for sure. Follow Wolf on, as always, on Twitter, at Joey_W. Great stories, as always, from Wolf on and the rest of the Scores NBA Future team. By the way, your Pelicans, I feel like they're your Pelicans. Your Pelicans, all right, got 80 points out of AD, Nikola Mirotic, and Julius Randle last night, and also beat the Nuggets. I mean, they're really fun to watch, man.
They are. Last night was a really good night for like my recent features. Because like before that, I'd written one about how Kemba is really good and the rest of the Hornets are really bad and don't deserve him.
Yeah.
And he dropped 60 in a loss.
Yeah.
And then the one I wrote after that was about the Pelicans' 3-man front court, and they combined to drop 81 points in a win. So. Yeah, it was a good night.
Yeah, there you go. Read all of Wolfon's things on the Score app. Listen to Pound the Rock. And, you'll see another Pound the Rock episode. At least, there might be one tomorrow. We don't know, actually. We'll probably discuss this after we hang up. But there will definitely be one on Thursday, so watch out for that. We're going to talk about the Raptors in that episode. And, I plugged the podcast enough. It is what it is. Anyway, thanks everyone for listening, and we'll be back next week.